Welcome to a UNHCR podcast on the prevention of gender-based violence. Join us as we explore the innovative work from the front lines of our operations globally. Get inspired from partner organizations who created leading GBV prevention program models. I am your host, Maria Paula Castaneda, UNHCR Talent Learning and Development Officer. Welcome back to today's episode. We're discussing a really interesting program model called SASA Together and how SASA Together mobilizes communities to prevent violence against women. Today, I'm really excited to have with me Yvette Alal, Technical Manager for Raising Voices. Hello, Yvette.
Hi, Maria Paula. How are you? I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you, Yvette. Great, doing well, thank you. And also joining us for our conversation today is Cathy Winnie Mavenjina, who is a community-based protection officer for UNHCR in South Sudan. Hi, Cathy.
Hello, Maria Paula. It's nice for me to be here today.
Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for your time today. Yvette, I would like to start our conversation talking about the concept of power. So, why has Raising Voices decided to reframe violence prevention by using the language of power? And what happens when there's a reflection around the personal use of power in relationships and in families and in institutions?
That's a very important question, Maria Paula, and thank you for asking. So at Raising Voices, we believe that language is political. And we believe that if we carefully choose our language, then it can be very powerful and can be inspiring and also promote hope. So maybe just to provide a brief history, at Raising Voices, our prevention work started before SASA. We used to use an approach called mobilizing communities to prevent domestic violence. And like many programs, we used the language of gender and rights, the language that everyone was using, and which we thought was most appropriate to communicate the ideas that we were trying to put forward. But we repeatedly found that this language felt foreign and abstract, and people didn't actually connect it with their own lives and behaviors, and didn't connect it to their day-to-day relationships. In Kampala, for example, when we started programming on prevention of violence against women, it came at a time when everyone was talking about gender equality, and there was a lot of backlash. I think the community, it was a really new concept to the community, and everyone was pushing back on these ideas because to them, it sounded like it was an idea that was promoting, supremacy over men. And so there was a lot of backlash. And we found that by using the language of rights and gender, we were just really sucking people into that same backlash. And we've learned over time that if we use language that's aspirational, then people are going to feel more, empowered and want to participate in the program. And that's why in SASA now, and in its iteration, SASA Faith and SASA Together, we are very deliberate on using the language of power, because we find that when we use this language, it's more provocative and personal, and anyone can relate to the feelings of having or lacking power. The language of power also shifts the focus from violence being perceived as a women's issue to it being a community issue, one that each of us can contribute to changing. And lastly, the language of power inspires all of us to use our power positively. It does not discriminate. It's not, everyone can really be involved in using their power positively, ultimately leading to change in behavior and social norms.
Thank you, Eva. I love that. The positive use of power and the shift of the entire community. And on that, could you tell us a little bit more about SASA Together, this Raising Voices program model? If you could tell us a little bit about the background and about the program itself, please.
Sure. So first, I'll start by giving a brief overview of the SASA approach. Published in 2008, SASA is a community mobilization approach to prevent violence against women. And SASA works with communities to challenge social norms that perpetrate violence against women and promote more balanced relationships between women and men. SASA Together is our most recent adaptation of the SASA activist kit that rose from lessons learned from implementing the SASA approach. You could say it's an improvement of the SASA approach. For example, there's been improved activities that are aligned to the circles of influence. There is clarity and a focus on intimate partner violence and tools for supporting staff, activists, and leaders. We also have another iteration called SASA Faith, which is specifically for faith-based communities to prevent violence against women. So together, these three iterations, SASA and SASA Faith and SASA Together, have the same essential elements, which are the first one, that these three iterations all use a benefits-based approach that emphasizes the benefits of change rather than the consequences of violence against women. They also use a gendered power analysis, which recognizes men's use of power over women as the root cause of violence against women and seeks to create more balanced relationships between women and men. And thirdly, they use a phased approach to change that introduces ideas over time to engage with people at different stages within their process of change. And lastly, they use a holistic community engagement that mobilizes all of community life by working across the socio-ecological model to reach a critical mass for change. So in a nutshell, that is really what the SASA approach is all about.
Thank you, Yvette. That was really illuminating, and I see so many overlaps with how we approach the prevention of gender-based violence at UNHCR and this very innovative program model. I want to ask Cathy now, because Cathy, I understand that you are implementing, or you have been implementing SASA Together in South Sudan. And I want to ask you, how have you observed this program in practice? What's your take on this concept that Yvette was mentioning on change, on the possibility of change? Can communities change? What's been your experience of this in South Sudan?
Thank you, Maria Paula, for that interesting question. And yes, in South Sudan, we have been implementing SASA Together. We are implementing SASA Together in 3 locations, in both IDP camps and in refugee settings. And we have seen SASA Together work. South Sudan is a context where GBV is so prevalent, and it's related to power issues that lead to so much violence against women. So in the implementation of SASA Together, we have been able to see communities change. Community members are now able to understand that abusing power is the root cause of violence in the community. And particularly in Ajomthok and Pamir, where I'm currently based, we have been able to see community members come up and tell us that they realized, women telling you, oh, I didn't know that I had power within myself. I didn't know that I could take a decision. And all this is because of the implementation of SASA Together in South Sudan. And then women are able to come up, community members are able to come up and say, I can say no. I'm able to discuss with my partner. I have the power. Together we have the power. So yes, we are seeing that change is happening. Communities are changing. One woman particularly told us in one of our engagements that she thought it was only men who had power in the community. And she was particularly impressed to learn that she had power within herself. So she told us that this has made her change her belief, and to know that it's not only men who have power. In South Sudan, most times, because of the customary setting, men are normally the leaders of the family, so most of the women thought it's the men who have power. But through implementing SASA Together, women have realized that they do have power within themselves, and we are seeing this change. And then secondly, in addition to that, in Jamjang, we have seen some family members saying that family members, community members, women and men, saying that they've been able to embrace the SASA Together approach in their own personal lives. Initially, we would see so many cases of intimate partner violence, but when they've embraced the SASA Together approach, it's really changing lives. We are getting testimonies of positive change. So yes, we do believe that through the implementation of the SASA Together model in South Sudan, we are seeing change. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. That's really powerful. I imagine that you hear stories like that all the time about the positive impact that SASA Together is making as it expands through all of these contexts. I just want to say that I think at UNHCR, it's really an honor to walk together with Raising Voices in implementing this program. And, you know, something that struck me about observing the SASA Together model in Shingwali refugee settlement in Uganda last year was the different levels of community engagement. You know, we observed how the activists, there were community activists, government institutions such as the police and education center, local community leaders, religious leaders, you know, everybody's talking about SASA Together. And, you know, Cathy alluded a bit to the challenging context, but could you speak a bit more on how you manage resistance when engaging the community?
Okay. So, like I mentioned earlier, we've had our share of lessons. Really, we've learned from a lot from our previous programming and from what we see from other programs. So, one of the key lessons we've learned over time is that programs, though intended to prevent violence against women, can sometimes actually have unintended consequences and risks. And that's why it's important for any violence against women prevention program to build in mechanisms to anticipate and mitigate backlash. So there are many ways that SASA Together manages resistance and tries to mitigate harm. The first one is that from our experience, we found that working across the circles of influence is really one of the ways to reduce resistance, because it means that everyone is going to be involved in preventing violence, and it helps everyone to feel that they are part of the change that they are creating. What this also means is that community members themselves lead the change, and that organizations from outside only come in as facilitators. And also, just like you said from what you observed in Changwali, the refugees themselves were leading the work of preventing violence against women. And of course, the organizations that are leading this work trained them and facilitates them with the resources and the skills to be able to lead this program. Now, that's very significant, because if the people from that very community are leading the process of change, then it's relatable. It's different than when someone from outside comes, and of course, most times will come, we're driving a Porsche car, you have your hair nicely done, and you really look different. So if you come and start to talk to people about their lives, they will look at you and they're like, yeah, but who are you? You don't understand us. You're not one of us. Now, if someone who is really one of them stands up and says, look, yeah, we have a problem. And the problem is that there's violence in our community, and we are silent about it. We're not doing much about it. Then people will pay attention, because that is emerging organically from among themselves. It becomes more of their problem than more of an outside problem. So that's why it's very important that you work with people who are based and live and are part of that community. The second way in which the SASA approach reduces backlash or tries to mitigate backlash is by having a well-trained and confident team of activists. So activists, that's what we call the people who lead the program in SASA Together. They go through intense training, 3 days training, 4 days training, sometimes even 3 or 4 times before they are commissioned to go out to start to have conversations with people in their communities. And this is all to prepare them for the resistance that they are going to experience when they go out. And remember, many times these are people who are well known in their community, and community members have seen them struggle in their relationships. So if they get up and speak about violence, people are going to want to challenge them. So it's important that they get the skills to be able to speak very confidently and to respond when people try to challenge them. And thirdly, SASA also tries to mitigate backlash by being patient and recognizing that change takes time. And so we allow programs to introduce ideas gradually, starting with easier ideas, ideas, for example, around power, like Cathy was saying, ideas like, yeah, we all have power, and that it's really up to us to choose to use our power positively. So we start with these simpler ideas, and we gradually move on to more complex ideas like men's use of power over women. And when we do that, these ideas build trust in the program, starting with smaller ideas and moving on to more complex ideas really builds trust, because you're not starting from the end. We've seen programs which will come and say, stop violence. And people will be like, oh, okay, what? What did we just talk about? How can I stop violence when I think that violence is right? It's justified. Yeah. And who are you to come and tell me how to behave? But SASA encourages conversations. It encourages dialogue. No one is coming to tell another person to stop anything. That dialogue, actually, when people start to talk and to challenge what they see, then they'll come to their own conclusion that what they see happening around them is harmful, and they're going to want to change. And also, like we mentioned earlier, the language that we use is very important. So just also really to repeat and reemphasize that when we use a language that's evolving, that's not exclusive, but that one that's inclusive, and if we use a language that brings hope and is aspirational, everyone is going to want to be part of that work. And by so doing, we'll be preventing backlash. And then lastly, and I'm sure Cathy will also want to add a few more ideas, but the last point I wanted to talk about here is that SASA Together uses communication materials that are carefully designed to provoke critical thinking about people's lives, rather than telling them what's right or wrong. So again, these materials, depending on where they're going to be used, have to be adapted very carefully so that when people look at them, they're interesting, they're exciting, people will want to give a second look, but most importantly, people will see themselves in those pictures. And when that happens, then people are going to look at the program as part of themselves, they will want to be part of that change if the program is actually, if the materials are actually relatable. Cathy, please feel free to add anything else. So all of these aspects together ensure that there is less resistance coming from the community.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing, Yvette. And I think, something that struck me a lot is the courage that the community activists have to just have these conversations. And even as you say, they have, the materials, and you begin with simple conversations that at the very beginning don't necessarily challenge. It builds up to challenging existing power structures. And Cathy, do you have anything to add from your side about managing resistance as you've implemented SASA Together in South Sudan?
Yes, Maria Paula. When UNHCR and partners were implementing SASA Together in South Sudan, one of the challenges we faced was related to the cultural context. Like we shared, like we're discussing, sometimes some topics within the South Sudan context are considered taboo. Intimate partner violence, GBV happening between couples in the community. There are certain things that people don't talk about. Couples, a woman saying no to sexual relations, those are things that people cannot talk about. So when we began the SASA Together approach, we faced a lot of resistance in that sometimes when the activists want to talk about something, other members would really be reluctant. But like Yvette pointed out, like the activists are really courageous, and like you also rightly said, and they volunteer to be part of the change and they lead the process. So when community members see that these are things that are affecting them and people are talking about them, then slowly that resistance is broken. The change comes gradually. It hasn't been an easy journey. Some of the phases took longer because we do acknowledge that change takes time, and community members want to talk about something, they want to understand it. And when they see their own people changing, they see a couple who was fighting and now living happily, they're able to plan together, do things together, share roles. It has really helped us in the implementation of SASA together. And also linked to what Yvette said, the communication materials that are used in the SASA together model, they do speak to the community members. Sometimes when the activists using the communication materials, community members get so interested and they're like, yes, this is happening. What can we do about it? So initially, something that they would not be willing to talk about, when we're using the communication material, they're able to talk about it openly. So we feel that, yes, there was some resistance, but we are working on it. And then finally, also, like some of the community activists initially were shy and were not willing to speak out in their community because of the cultural context. They look at it and say, I'm just a young woman. How can I stand in the community? I'm nobody. I do not have power. So they were shy. And then that kind of makes them reluctant. But with the support, mentoring, capacity building that we've continued doing, sharing the resource materials, practicing with them, holding regular meetings, we have been able to overcome those barriers of resistance. We sit together, plan together, mentor them, and of course seek support from Raising Voices as needed to be able to make them confident. So we've been able to overcome that resistance also that way. Thank you.
Thanks, Cathy. I want to maybe go deeper into something that you mentioned, which is change. And Yvette also mentioned, the phased approach to change and how you're seeing how relationships are changing between couples and in the community. But that's so hard to tell, right? How change is possible. So I'm wondering, Yvette, if you could tell us a little bit more about how you know that SASA Together works. How do you know what is behind the evidence-based part of this program having an impact?
Yeah, that's a very important question because we get asked that question so often. And truth be told, I think anyone who is working on preventing violence against women would really want to know that their approach works. And so between 2007 and 2012, Raising Voices conducted a study in partnership with the London School of Hygiene, and we conducted a randomized control trial for SASA. So the SASA study, like we call it, was really one of the first randomized control study in Africa to assess community level change of a violence prevention program. So really just to say that there had been other assessments that were, really assessing individuals that had participated in a program. But the SASA study was different, that it assessed the community-wide level change of the program. And the study showed some really interesting findings. It showed that violence is preventable, and that changing norms is possible within relatively short program timeframes. So this, as you can imagine, the timeframe was about 3 or 4 years. So within such, and typically most programs would have their violence prevention program running for about the same time. So what the study told us is that it's really possible to prevent violence within relatively short timeframes. A detailed report is available at our website, www.raisingvoices.org, for those who might be interested. But I'm happy to share a few highlights here. So first, we found that in communities that received the SASA intervention, there was about 52% less risk of women experiencing physical violence compared to those that did receive the intervention. There were also about 18% fewer men who reported concurrent relationships. If you come from this part of the world, this is such a big deal because concurrent relationships are actually the norm and are glorified. But seeing this reduce as an impact of, of participating in the SASA program was really a great milestone and something that was worth celebrating. And there were also about 28% more people accepting women's rights to refuse to have sex. So we generally found, like Cathy was saying, that there were significant changes that were registered at the individual level and at the community level, that prevalence of violence greatly reduced and that acceptance of violence significantly reduced. And all of these are really important in the prevention of violence against women.
I'm quite impressed by those figures that you gave, Yvette. So 53% of women reported less risk of experiencing physical violence. Yeah, that's very powerful. Cathy, is there anything that you want to add, Cathy, about, I mean, we've already alluded to several examples on the impact you've seen from the program and the communities that you have been implementing SASA together.
Yes, Maria Paula, we have seen quite a positive impact on the implementation of SASA together. One of them is that right now, when we engage with the community through focus group discussions and different programs, the community members have now realized the harmful norms they have been previously engaged in. And an example of this is what I already said. Initially, women were not included in decision-making at family level. We have programs where, for example, a family receives food and the man decides he wants to sell the food, this goes here. But now we see families working together. We are seeing reduced cases of GBV in the community. And when you dig deeper, you find this is all attributed to SASA together. And then in addition to that, we have seen an increase in women becoming leaders. And these are women who were activists, who have been mentored initially in the community. They were not able to speak freely. Some were shy, but now we've seen them grow to become community leaders. And this is all because of the SASA Together model, where we mentor them, encourage them to talk, and we guide them. We've been able to mentor them. And we've seen them growing in their role as leaders and becoming women leaders within the community. And then apart from this, we're also seeing an increased support to female children. In the cultural context of South Sudan, women and girls are normally relegated to domestic roles. If a family had to choose between a boy and girl going to school, most times they would give the boy a greater option. But now, in areas where we are implementing SASA together, we are seeing that more girls are being enrolled in school. When we check our school registers, when we link up with our education partners, we are seeing girls going to school. And when you dig deeper, they tell us, yes, it's because this is being SASA Together is being implemented. So for us, that is a positive change. And then we've also been able to see community leaders, community members taking ownership of GBV prevention within the community. An example of this was that in Ajongthok, in one of the camps, the community leaders decided at a community leaders meeting that I think it is us, the leaders, who need to take an active role. We have the power to be able to take decision to reduce GBV within our community. And they were able to organize an activity where they did awareness raising, they talked about power, they talked about the different concepts of SASA Together, and they used it within their context to be able to reduce violence against women. So for us, when we see this happening, we say that, yes, this is a positive impact we are doing. And then the community members, even in the other zones, we began in South Sudan, we are implementing SASA. We began small and we are spreading gradually. So we've seen other community leaders in areas where we are planning to move. They come up to us and tell us, bring this approach. We want to see this change in our community. This community used to have this, but we are seeing change. So why can't you move to cover the whole of Ajongthok, cover the whole of Pamir refugee camp? So this shows us that SASA together as an approach is working, in addition to what I mentioned earlier. Thank you.
Thanks, Cathy, and thank you for those examples. I want to ask also, Yvette, because I understand that SASA Together began in Kampala and in Uganda and has spread worldwide. And with UNHCR and partners, we're also implementing SASA Together in various countries, even all the way to Bangladesh, right? In both refugee settings and internally displaced person settings. So what challenges have you encountered in the implementation of SASA Together in different contexts? And how do you overcome these challenges? And I know there can be, there's probably many, but I'm wondering if there's anything that stands out for you.
Yeah. So, like you've said, like you've rightly said, SASA Together was originally implemented here in Kampala, Uganda, and that's where the SASA study was also conducted. But because of the strength of the program over time, there was really increasing demand from different parts of the world. So to date, SASA is being implemented in over 30 countries by about 75 organizations. Of course, the reach of all of this is quite broad. We have SASA being implemented in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, in the Pacific. So really many places. Of course, what this means is that it's going to require a lot of time for adaptations. And just like Cathy said, when you get materials that were designed with the African context in mind, you really need to factor in the audience that you're going to be conducting these activities with. And so that requires that you adapt them, adapt the images, translate the language. But then we also have specific challenges that relate with the humanitarian emergencies that require SASA Together staff to deprioritize SASA Together activities and shift attention to most urgent issues. So we've seen this, for example, in Bangladesh, when there was a massive fire, and when there was flooding, and very recently when there was a cyclone. And that meant that you couldn't continue having conversations about preventing violence. All of those stuff really had to shift towards addressing those emergencies. And I'm sure Cathy could also talk about what just happened in South Sudan, where they've received a lot of people coming in from Sudan, and that has created a shift in their focus. And there's also mobility and security restrictions. Again, just most recently in Bangladesh, there was curfews that were imposed in the refugee communities. Activists couldn't freely move within the camp to conduct activities. Communication was cut off. Staff couldn't access the camps. It just becomes very challenging, really, to do any productive work within such contexts. So really, those are some of the challenges that quickly come to my mind when I think about what's going on in terms of, people who are using SASA Together, especially with the humanitarian settings.
Yeah, thanks, Yvette, for spelling a lot of that. And I think, yes, as you say, it echoes a lot of what we experience across emergencies and non-emergencies as well. And I will stay with your message that we need to invest in change for it to happen. So thank you. I have another question for you, Yvette, and it's, what would you say to GBV practitioners that want to work more closely or maybe even start implementing SASA Together in their context?
So Like I said earlier, we receive a lot of requests from different people who are interested in using the SASA approach. Of course, everyone would love to use an approach that works, but it's very important. What I would really say to them is that it's very important to understand the approach that you're requesting for and to understand for whom it was designed. So just to say, for example, that SASA was designed for practitioners who are working with communities to prevent intimate partner violence among adult heterosexual relationships. So we don't have evidence. And again, if you can allude to the study that I just talked about, we don't have any evidence that SASA Together works outside of this audience. But there's been adaptations. Of course, these adaptations have taken into consideration the fidelity of the SASA approach and really ensured that the essential elements of the SASA approach are maintained in these adaptations. So for example, we have a partner in Haiti called Beyond Borders, who has done an adaptation called Power to Girls, which is specifically for working with girls to prevent violence against women. So I would really encourage anyone who is interested in preventing violence against women first to look out for those approaches. And I know there are many. UNHCR uses some of them, for example. So it would be most beneficial to use an approach that's specifically designed, either designed for working with, the audience that you're choosing to work with, or one that has had some significant adaptations to make sure that it suits the audience that you're working with.
Thanks so much, Yvette. And now, as we're wrapping up, I'm wondering if I could have a kind of a closing thought from each of you. It's been a really rich conversation, so thank you. As we've discussed, the origins of SASA Together, what it entails, what it's like to implement, and the change it's bringing to prevent violence against women. Maybe Cathy, would you like to start? Do you have maybe a thought for our listeners as we close?
Yes, I would like to encourage our listeners to embrace the SASA Together model because we have seen it work. We started from somewhere. We've really seen it work to end violence against women. It's an approach that is doable. It's an approach that when you plan for it well, you plan your resources, your staffing, you use the guidance you get from Raising Voices and put it to work in the best community. You choose the best community, you will be able to make an impact and have positive change and reduce violence against women. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. And Yvette, from you, what would you like to say as kind of a closing thought?
I would like to say that violence is preventable and that we can all be part of preventing violence against women. So it doesn't matter whether you are UN staff or a staff of an INGO, or you are a refugee, or you are, someone else in a development context. We can all be part of preventing violence against women when we consider how we use our power and choose to use our power positively. So that for me is really the key message that I wanted to pass on.
Thank you so much, Yvette, Cathy. This has been a very enlightening conversation. I loved speaking to both of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maria Paula.
Thank you, Maria Paula.